So I was lucky enough to be able to introduce Liz Weaver, who is our keynote speaker for tonight. As the director for the Center for a Vital Community, I am fortunate enough to do leadership training. We support nonprofits, and we also get to move forward community initiatives. And on my watch, the community initiative that we've been working on is poverty. And so I can say that is this super loud, or is it just me? Or both? Backing up more? So anyway, so it's poverty, and we have been, I look back, it's been 2 years, and after listening to Liz talk about it today at lunch, I got a little bit of a sneak preview, and you guys are going to love it. I can say that I think we're in the infant stages of collective impact, which I had never heard of before a month ago, so look at us. But we are excited. I'm excited, and I wish that I could have all of my committee here to see, we really can do it. I mean, the stories that Liz will tell you and the work that they're doing, they and so many other people around Collective Impact will just blow your mind. Things that seem completely ridiculous, like you could actually move the dial on graduation rates or poverty. I mean, truly moving people out of poverty within a 3 to 5 year time span. You just think, sure. You just have to throw a lot of money at it, and then even that doesn't work. This is the amazing thing about Collective Impact that's just blown me away, and I'm fired up about it, and I can't wait to see what you guys can come up with in your own towns, in your own learning communities, everything, to see what you can do with Collective Impact to make some huge things happen. So with no further ado, Liz Weaver.
Good evening, everybody. It's, so this is my first time in Wyoming, and I spent a couple of days in South Dakota and drove over here from South Dakota to Wyoming, and so I've learned a lot about the vast spaces that you guys have and the long drives between gas stations. I think you have to be really good planners if you live in Wyoming or South Dakota around gas. You couldn't be like my husband, who is perpetually driving on empty. You know, that just wouldn't get him anywhere. It's a lovely, lovely, lovely state. So I'm Liz Weaver, and I work for an organization called Tamarack. And I was saying to the folks at my table, Tamarack we call ourselves an Institute for Community Engagement. And we're a not-for-profit organization that works pan-Canadian, which means that we work across Canada. And essentially what Tamarack is trying to do is trying to bridge knowledge. So we look across the world and try to get the big ideas and think a little bit about them at Tamarack and practice. So how do people like you and people that are in our network really influence and change their communities for better? Who are those social change champions, and how do we bring the knowledge to them? And more importantly, gather from them their experiences and their knowledge so that we can co-generate together, so that we can learn together and we don't have to reinvent the wheel over and over again, which is sometimes what we do. And technology is a great equalizer in that way. We support learning communities. There are three, just to give you a bit of background, there are 3 learning communities that are of particular interest to Tamarack. One is really based on the work of practitioners like yourselves. And with that learning community, we really believe in R&D, rip off and duplicate. So if you come to any of the Tamarack websites and you see a tool or a resource that you're really interested in and you think it might be something useful to your community or to your collaboration or to your network, R&D it, rip it off and duplicate it. The second community, and this is the community that I'm most engaged with, is around poverty reduction. And about 12 years ago in Canada, we wanted to test whether a city, a neighborhood, could actually move the dial for people that are living in these communities with low and limited income and often are more marginalized. And so we didn't know at the time that we were doing collective impact, but in fact, as we came to learn, that very much the way that we were working fit within the broad streams of collective impact. And this is really bringing all the sectors of the community together. So bringing the business community to the table, educators, the faith community, individuals with the lived experience of poverty, local government, and also voluntary sector people, and having a different conversation. So very much what has happened in Sheridan with Vital Communities, having that different kind of conversation about, what is this issue that is really challenging our community, and can we do something differently? Can we think differently? Can we work differently? And can we leverage our collective knowledge to, and our collective resources to really move the needle? And what we've seen in Canada, which is really interesting because we've been at this work, this poverty reduction work, for about 12 years now. I would say 10 years ago, nobody talked about poverty in Canada. 12 years later, we have 106 municipalities that are working on poverty, 106 cities, and for Canada, that's a lot. That's practically everything, coast to coast to coast, as I like to say. And we have 9 of 10 provinces in all 3 territories with poverty reduction strategies. And the work of our 13 initial cities have impacted the lives of 202,000 Canadians. And to put that into perspective, there's about 3 million Canadians that live in poverty in Canada, so that's pretty significant, and for 13 cities to impact the lives of 202,000 Canadians is great. So that's the second area, and then the third area, the thing that is emerging for Tamarack, is really this notion that in many ways, we've disconnected as people that live in neighborhoods and live in communities. And so we're really testing this idea. Can we have conversations across people in neighborhoods and really reconnect them? And what would that mean for the cities that we work in and for the neighborhoods that we work in? And so that work is called Deepening Community, and it's actually kind of interesting work. So I'm trying to do this on my tablet here. Okay, so my talk today is to essentially give you a bit of an overview of collective impact and to just talk about the power and the potential of this framework for community change. And some of you will, after listening to me, go, oh yeah, lots of the things that we're doing fit within this lens of collective impact. Some of you might say, yes, we're already a collective impact initiative. Others of you might say, that's really intriguing. I need to go and read more or spend a bit more time thinking about it. And I think that it's only been a couple of years since the whole idea behind collective impact was first published in the Stanford Social Innovation Review. There was an article written by 2 guys that come out of a large nonprofit consulting firm based in Boston called FSG, Social Impact Consultants. And they were the ones who are the big thinkers behind collective impact. And when we read the articles in Canada, we said, oh, this sounds like what we're doing. So the angels started to sing to us. And we've worked quite closely with the folks at FSG. So before I talk about what collective impact is all about, I think there's some things that I have found just based on my own personal experience and also, what we've observed in Canada and in the US and Australia when we've spoken to groups that are really important things to think about as context. The first thing is that, when we talk about community change, we're often talking about it from the perspective of collaboration. And collaboration is one of those words that, we all know it's a big word, but often when you sit around a collaborative table, people around that table will have different reasons for being around that collaborative table. And one of the first things you have to do is you have to get agreement on, how do we really intend to collaborate together? Are we about sharing information, which is valuable in some collaborative contexts? Or are we truly about working together in an intentional kind of way to really make a difference and make a result? So collaboration, understanding where you are, we talk about this at Tamarack from the perspective of a collaboration spectrum. And the collaboration spectrum at the one end is, some people sit around these collaborative tables and they're really, their real agenda is to find out, who's getting what funding and how do I get that funding myself. So they're in a competition mode. That's okay. That's part of the reality that we all live in. But it's also important to articulate. And then others are sitting around the collaboration table, and the other end of the spectrum is really truly to begin to think about how do our services kind of align together or maybe even move towards integration. And there are lots of points around the collaboration spectrum. Collective impact is a higher order of collaboration. It's really about intentionality. It's about saying, we're going to work together not only for the benefit of my own individual organization or the program or service that I'm delivering, but actually we're going to work together to benefit the outcomes for this community. Because we believe in something that this community needs something better, right? There has to be a better future for the community and for the people that live in the community. And that's where collective impact sits. It's at the higher level. And the other thing that I've thought about a lot when we think about collective impact is then we can't just dive into the work. Because if we're bringing different people together with different perspectives, whether you're working in childcare or in education, or you're coming from the health professions, or you're a citizen, you have a different, each of those people has a different lens on the issue that you're trying to move the needle on. And so you've got to build trust, you've got to build relationships, you've got to spend time in conversation and not assume that our perspective on the issue is the only perspective on the issue. It's the middle that is almost the right perspective. So it's interesting, particularly because I've worked in the area of poverty. When you bring the business community into that conversation, they have a very definitive perspective about the issue of poverty. People who work in faith communities have a perspective based on, the services and the programs that they deliver. And so the magic is in the middle. And that is really getting to that magic middle. It's about spending time in conversation and building trust. And that's, I think, a critical component of collective impact. Okay. Come on, tablet. So the other thing I think to set collective impact into context is that not everything that we do actually fits collective impact. So there are sometimes simple problems that need simple solutions in our community. Collective impact is tough work. It's about bringing lots of people together in the conversation. If it's a simple problem, get to the simple solution. Don't use this as a framework for community change. Where collective impact is really a great framework is when you're dealing with a more complex problem. And so some of the ideas behind a complex problem is that there are lots of different kinds of players that are involved in that complex problem. If you think about the early years as an example, the years between 0 to 3, there are parents that are involved, there are childcare professionals that are involved, there might be healthcare professionals that are involved, there are home visiting professionals, there are the children themselves. So lots of folks can be engaged in thinking about those early years, similar to poverty, right? There's lots of people that potentially could be involved. There will be different definitions of success from each of the different perspectives. And so if you're thinking about it from an educational perspective, it might be, some things to do with language and, some of those early brain development kind of things. And if you're coming at it from a health perspective, it might be about growth. Early years is not exactly my area of expertise, but I'm just trying to draw. So complexity says there's lots of different players. They have different determinations of what success looks like. There isn't one single definition of success. And also, the problem will be framed in a different way by different perspectives. So that is important. So if you're thinking about, does collective impact, is it the right community change framework for us? Think about it from the perspective of the problem that you're trying to work in. Is it a complex problem? Are there lots of players? And would it benefit from a framework like collective impact? So those are the two contextual things that I think are important. The final piece around collective impact from a context perspective, I think, is that it is about not only talking to the people that you already know, but it's about bringing different people into the conversation. And so we intentionally in Canada, when we were working in the issue of poverty, we intentionally thought it was important to have the business community at the table, and we thought it was also important to have people with the lived experience of poverty to the table. And you know, it's really interesting to me because the voluntary sector and people who work in government, they have language that they share, and they can engage in these conversations in a way that, you know, we do a lot of things together. When you bring business people to the table, when you bring people who have a lived experience of an issue to the table, you actually have really rich and different kinds of conversations. And there's almost two camps in those, in this kind of work. There's the immediacy camp. The business people want to get to the quick solutions, and so do the people living in poverty, have the lived experience of poverty. And then there's the process camp, the folks that are more open to saying, you know, we've got to build trust and work together. And it's the magic, again, that magic middle is bringing those two different groups together. So, let me just set for you now the context of collective impact. Collective impact, as I said, is a framework for community change. There are lots of different entry points in collective impact. And so we've seen as it's evolved over the last couple of years in Canada and the United States, we've seen it be singularly focused on a very narrowly defined problem. So a really good example of this is teen pregnancy rates in Tillamook County, Oregon. The community came together because they were the county with the highest teen pregnancy rates across all of Oregon. So they wanted to work very intentionally to decrease the teen pregnancy rate. So that's one example of being very focused. And then there are other examples of collective impact initiatives where, you know, in Strive, the Strive initiative in Cincinnati and Northern Kentucky, they are working on a cradle to career educational achievement initiative, where they make sure that all the children that are born in Northern Kentucky and the Cincinnati area are enter the 0 to 5 years, enter school ready to learn, are supported in and out of school, actually get supported in and out of the high school experience, graduate from high school, enter college and university, and then graduate from college and university and enter into a job in the Cincinnati and Northern Kentucky area. And what's interesting about that initiative is that they have 374 organizations that are engaged along that continuum and working together to make sure that all kids that are born in that community, in those two communities, are successful throughout their educational career. It's an amazing initiative that you can look up. So you can be narrowly focused or you can be very broadly focused across your community. I was thinking about this. I was thinking, you know, we're going to have lots of different people in the room, but one of the big things that I know about the United States is that football is big here in the United States. So if you think about how can I get involved in collective impact, there's lots of different roles that you as individuals can play if you get invited. So you could be a coach. You could actually be involved in the planning and the design of it. You could be a quarterback, so you could be leading the way. You could be a player on the team, someone involved, you know, on a working group or on a steering committee. I think the other two roles that I think are really important and ones we often don't see in our communities is you can be a cheerleader, right? Someone from the outside who may not have the time to be really directly involved in a table, but you can be on the outside and say, wow, this is really good work that's going on in my community. Let's cheerlead it on. Let's be advocates for this change, even though I can't spend my time. Or you could be a fan, right? And you know, if you think about a football game, the football game needs all of those things, right? It needs fans, it needs cheerleaders, it needs coaches, it needs players. And I think in collective impact, you know, when sometimes in the early stages of this work, you know, and I think we've seen this in collaboration as well, if we're not invited to the table immediately, you know, we kind of go, what are they doing and who are they to stick their heads out? And, you know, I think if we truly go into collective impact work in the spirit that we want to improve the outcomes for children in our community or improve the lives of people living in poverty, then it's incumbent on us to be, you know, to play these multiple roles. The other thing I think that is really important is this phrase that I've come to think about a lot in my work. And, I think, we all, the pressure of the work that we do is intense. And we're sometimes delivering a lot of service without a lot of recognition, and I know I get grumpy about that. So collective impact really calls upon us to have the spirit of generosity and curiosity, right? Is this something, what are they trying to do over there? Let's be curious about it and let's be generous about it. And I think that the final thing that is really important from your own perspectives about this work is that I heard this today, what happens? We had a lunch with some folks from a number of different foundations, and someone said, so what happens if, the table is, we've got lots of people at the table, but one key player isn't at the table, what happens then? And my advice would be, let the table move ahead, but always keep the door open for that player to join you when they're ready. So that's also a critical thing about collective impact. Come on. So when this idea was first written about in the winter of 2011, the reason why John Kania and Mark Kramer actually wrote the first article, they were asked by large foundations in the United States to look at the lay of the land in terms of what was happening from a foundation perspective. And they looked at how foundations were funding programs and services across a wide variety of states. And they found that essentially what was happening was there was isolated funding that was being delivered to individual organizations or sometimes even programs and services. And that was good because programs and services were being delivered, but that we weren't getting to the change on some of these big complex issues that we'd really hoped for. We weren't seeing high school graduation rates increase. We weren't seeing levels of poverty decrease. We weren't getting to that higher order of change. We were getting to isolated impact through isolated funding. But also when they started to do this research, they saw a couple of examples where there was something different. And Strive in Cincinnati was one of those examples, the Cradle to Career Educational Initiative. Another one that they wrote about in their original article was the Elizabeth River Project, where there was really a very toxic river. Nothing grew in this river anymore. There were no fish swimming in this river, and the community came together to take back their river. So lots of funders came to the table, different segments of the community started to work together, the university and the biologists, and then the not-for-profit organizations came to the table. Volunteers started cleaning up the river, and it was the combination of all of those folks working collaboratively together that really turned this river around, this Elizabeth River Project. And so when they started to look at Strive and at the Elizabeth River Project, they noticed a couple of characteristics that really were different than what they were seeing in traditional collaboration. And what they saw was, the folks that were gathering together didn't come from a single sector. They actually came from a broad and diverse range of sectors. They weren't only focused on what their own organizations were trying to achieve. They were working at something higher. They were trying to get something where the change would impact them all in a very positive kind of way, and that the change would actually positively impact their community as a whole. And it wasn't about their individual organizations, it was about this collective impact. And that became the thinking behind collective impact. There were a number of things that as they began to look at it, they said, okay, so what makes this successful versus, traditional collaborations? And those became both the 3 preconditions of collective impact and the 5 conditions of collective impact. And collective impact, in many ways, it's a simple framework, right? If we're working in community change, it's good. Community change is complex, and there's lots of things happening all the time. We need simple frameworks, and so they started to think about those and put it together in a way that, I think has really spoken to a lot of individuals and a lot of organizations engaged in the work. So the first part of collective impact starts with these 3 preconditions of community change. And the 3 preconditions are, you need influential champions to be involved. So it really says, who are those people in our community that can make impact in a very short period of time? That we can not only bring them to the table and other people are going to listen to them, but it's also going to engage their sphere of influence. So you can imagine that if you're working on education, on high school graduation rates, you want to have the high school principal involved. You want to have some key folks in the education system involved. So influential champions is a critical part of a precondition of collective impact. The second precondition is urgency around the issue. And I think about this a lot from the perspective of the early years. I wrote a blog a couple of months ago. One of the things that we did in Hamilton around our poverty reduction work was we really focused on children and youth as a way of entering into the issue of poverty. And we partnered with a collaborative table that already existed in our community called Best Start. And around that table, one of their high focus areas was low birth weight babies. They were really concerned about the impact of the number of babies that were born in the city of Hamilton with low birth weight, because they knew that the science said that low birth weight babies have struggles in their early years in terms of brain synapses and the growth and things like that. And so they were talking a lot about low birth weight babies at their table, but nobody else in the community was talking about this issue. And yet, if you follow the trajectory of the number of children that are born with low birth weight, and I'm sure you all know this in this room, ultimately those babies are going to become employees, and those employees really mean a good job market and a good network of educated employees mean that your community is going to be prosperous, right? Because you can attract businesses. So low birth weight babies has a direct repercussion on the whole economy of your community. And yet the conversation happened here around this Best Start table and nowhere else in the community. So there wasn't any urgency beyond the Best Start table. And so collective impact really says, we've got to create some urgency in our community around the issue that we're passionate about. And urgency is brought upon us by bringing data to the table and really creating that conversation that is a different conversation. And so one of the things that you received today when you registered is a great report that looks at the science of the early years. And it's those kinds of reports and engaging in different conversations to say, do you know that actually low birth weight babies has an impact on the economic vitality of our community and connecting the dots for people? That's about creating urgency around the issue. When we started to work around poverty in Hamilton, we really wanted to look at, we needed to understand who was living in poverty and what their experiences were. And so urgency says that data is really important in terms of framing the issue. The final precondition of collective impact is this idea that we need to have adequate resources to do this work. And so who sat at a collaboration table where we do the work off the side of our desks? I've sat at lots of those tables, and they actually maintain momentum for a little bit of time, and then people start moving away from the table because people perceive that you're actually not really getting to any results. And, we come running into the meeting, and then we go back to our full desks, and the work actually starts to disappear. Collective impact says if this is really important work and we're trying to change our communities, we've got to invest time and resources into this work to make it happen. And so the 3 preconditions, just to reiterate, are influential champions. You want to bring influential champions to this work. You want to bring urgency to the issue that you're concerned about, so that is more than a conversation that happens at the side of the community, but it's a conversation that you have across your whole community, and you need to have the right amount of resources to do this work.
So that's the beginning stages of collective impact. The next and the core part of collective impact are 5 conditions. And these conditions are critical. And I think where collective impact is different than normal collaboration, not that collaboration is ever normal, but where it's different is collective impact is about all of these 5 conditions working together. So the 5 conditions, they're easy to say, harder to do, are the notion of having a common agenda. So really having a conversation across your community that we're all going to agree to focus on the early years, or that we're all going to agree to deal with this issue of poverty. The second condition is shared measurement. So not only are we going to work at something bigger, at a higher order issue, but we're also going to measure the fact that we're making progress. We're going to set some targets and timelines. We're going to draw the line in the sand, and we're going to hold ourselves accountable as a table to see what progress we're making and are we actually moving the needle. The third condition of collective impact is recognizing that in every single community in Canada, the United States, Australia, New Zealand, there's already a ton of stuff going on. So collective impact is not about building new things. It's about leveraging all of that capacity that's already in our community in a way that is focused on this issue that we're trying to tackle. So it's not about individual organizations and isolated impact. It's about bringing the food bank together with the housing providers, together with the homeless shelters, together with the employers, and talking about how do we move the needle for people living in poverty, and what's that continuum look like. In your case, it would be, bringing together the parents with the childcare providers, with the home visiting nurses, and really looking at how collectively can we improve the outcomes for kids in the 0 to 3 years? So it's really being much more intentional about that, and really they call it mutually reinforcing activities in the collective impact framework. And I think it's, it's that hard piece of work. How do we really become intentional about that? The fourth condition is, and I think a brilliant condition, is one called continuous communications. And, this is messy work, it's long-term work. People come at it with a lot of different perspectives. And so we've got to continually tell people, where are we now? How is this community moving forward? What are we doing that's successful? What are some of the bumps in the road that we're hitting along the pathway? And so continuous communications is a critical component, and particularly, if you're bringing people together who have different areas of expertise and different interests, they might not necessarily all agree on what those outcomes should be, and so we've got to talk to one another. I remember we had, at the Hamilton Roundtable, we had as our chair a guy who was from the private sector, who was a venture philanthropist and also an engineer. And he would come to our meetings, and he has a very interesting perspective about the issue of poverty. And he would bring that kind of notion to the table. So it wasn't that he was wrong in his notion, but he had a lens and a perspective. He was an influential champion. His notion changed over the course of our work together, but it's important to engage in the conversations with all these different perspectives. The final condition of collective impact, and Amy didn't talk a lot about the work of Vital Community here, but it's this idea of having a backbone, of having a couple of people and a core leadership team that is going to pay attention to this work as it evolves. And, I'm sure that Amy and her team would say that, being the backbone infrastructure in collective impact is sometimes like juggling a lot of balls, riding a unicycle, and being blindfolded, right? Because it is about bringing all the different parts of the community together and really focusing on the health of the whole community. And so that's what a backbone does. A backbone actually stewards the collective impact work forward. And that's where, if you think about the 3 preconditions, this notion that we need adequate resources, part of the adequate resources to say, if we're going to really try to get to these higher order, this higher order of change, we've got to invest in it from a human resource perspective, but also from a financial perspective. And, you know, I went to a conference that the FSG group held with funders across the United States. And it was really interesting to me because funders are starting to think about, not about making all of their investments in collective impact, but they're starting to think about how do we as funders have a bigger impact in our communities. And in Canada, in Ontario where I live, there's a large provincial funder called the Ontario Trillium Foundation. They have now moved to spending about $15 million across the province of Ontario focused on supporting collective impact initiatives. Because what they'd like to do is they'd like to be able to report to their donors and to the provincial government how their investments are improving the lives of people living in Ontario. So the 5 conditions: common agenda, shared measurement, mutually reinforcing activities, continuous communications, and a backbone infrastructure. So that's essentially what collective impact is all about. But, and in many ways you would say, oh, that's pretty interesting and sounds pretty simple. The devil is in the doing. The devil is in really bringing people together, as you know, and really trying to focus these collective impact efforts in a way that moves the needle. So in 2011, John Kania and Mark Kramer wrote this article. It's only now 2014, but we've seen tremendous change across Canada and the United States since the inception of this article. Collective impact is on the lips of lots of folks. What's also very interesting is in a very short period of time, there have been collective impact initiatives across a whole variety of domains where we have seen significant impact achieved already. So Strive in Cincinnati, if you go onto their website, their shared measurement framework is a little daunting. They have 72 measures that they check across their collective impact initiative and 15 key milestones. 40 of the 72 measures they've made appreciable progress on, and they've seen an increase in high school graduation rates. In about 4 years' time, they've seen an increase in high school graduation rates in Cincinnati and Northern Kentucky of more than 10%, and an increase in college enrollment rates of 16%. So they are making really significant progress. There's an initiative called Memphis Fast Forward, and Memphis Fast Forward is a really cool initiative. It's actually 5 collective impact initiatives across the city of Memphis where they're all focused on making Memphis a better place to live. And one area is around community safety, another is around poverty, another one is around education, another one is around revitalizing local government. They started Memphis Fast Forward just at the time of the economic downturn. Their community safety initiative reports, I think it's something like a 17% decrease in crime rates in Memphis because of this focus, this kind of community coming together and saying we're going to focus on community safety. In Halton region, there's an initiative called Our Kids Halton. Our Kids Halton is an initiative. They have what they call the Halton 7, and they're really focused on kids from 0 to 12. And they are trying to bring together a whole variety of different agencies and government departments and other kinds of service delivery partners to really make sure that in the Halton region, Halton is in Ontario, just between Hamilton and Toronto, or Niagara Falls and Toronto. It's a city actually of 4 diverse municipalities. It's a region of 4 different cities. So they're working across these 4 cities. The big idea that they have for their collective impact initiative is that all kids thrive. The last couple of years, one way that they thought that they would be very successful is that they would develop a shared data platform. And so if you go onto the Our Kids Halton network, you'll see their data portal. And so the data portal, there are 7 measures that they look at in terms of all children thriving in the Halton region. These, at the level, you can go onto their data portal, and if you live, in a neighborhood in Oakville, you can find out what the conditions are for kids in that neighborhood, not only from a demographic perspective, but also they do a survey every other year of kids at 12 years old and at 17 years old. So you'll get survey results based on kids reporting and also survey results based on parents reporting. So they have the Halton 7, which are their 7 core measures. What they've seen by setting up this data portal is that the lives of kids across the region, the experiences have been improving, but more importantly, they invite service providers across the region to put in their data. And the service providers are also using this data portal in terms of looking at where they're delivering services and programs. And what's been very interesting, I was chatting with the folks from the Our Kids Halton Network, and they said, you know, there were different service providers that said, we were initially going to deliver our program in neighborhood X, but when we looked at the data that was available online, we actually saw that the neighborhood right adjacent to that had a bigger need. And so now we're going to focus our service there. So that's what, you know, this shared measurement, this shared data approach can really make a difference. So there are hundreds and hundreds of those kinds of examples of collective impact. I'm really excited for the work that is happening here in Wyoming, and the fact that all of you are coming together to talk about, you know, the 0 to 3 years. It's an area that I think, you know, is one that is a prime opportunity to really focus our collective efforts to really make the difference for children and their families that are in those years, to really make sure that we have better outcomes for those kids and their families across, you know, not only across Wyoming, but across all of the states and across Canada as well. You know, the science says that the investments that we make in those early years pay dividends in the later years, and we know that from the poverty perspective work that we've done in Canada, that early year investment, particularly in families that are more marginalized and live within poverty circumstances, it's a critical investment. I would say that, you know, collective impact as a framework for community change lends itself really well to the work that you're doing. And hopefully over the next couple of days, we'll get to explore it from a number of different perspectives. It has a lot of potential and it has a lot of power, but it also, it has the ability to bring our communities together in different ways and really focus on things that will transform our communities. So we'll talk about that over the course of the next couple of days. The final thoughts that I just want to leave you with is that I know that each of you coming here today, you're going to be bringing with you your perspectives and your gifts and your knowledge and expertise from the domain that you work within. It's the kind of collective sharing that is the power and the magic of these kinds of conferences and the power and the magic of collective impact. And so I look forward to engaging with you in those conversations over the next couple of days we have together. Thank you.